Princess Valara Kethson stood at the balcony of her palace and looked down at the crystal spires of Etheria, prime with cold eyes and a colder heart. For today was the day her life would change forever in a way. She never wanted and never asked for if Galactic Council had spoken, and their word was law across 1,000 star systems, demanding peace between the Etherian Empire and the young human civilization through the oldest tradition known to the cosmos, a marriage of politics and power. She was to marry a human. The very thought made her silver blood run cold with disgust, and her luminous purple skin flickered with barely contained anger as she turned away from the view she had loved since childhood. Etherians were ancient and proud, their civilization stretching back millions of years before humans had even learned to make fire on their tiny blue world. And now she was expected to bind herself to one of these primitive creatures who lived barely a century and bruised at the slightest touch. Her handmaiden Sarah approached with careful steps and bowed low before, speaking in a whisper that carried fear and curiosity in equal measure. "Your Highness, the human ambassador has arrived at the landing platform and awaits your presence in the throne room." Valara closed her eyes and took a breath that did nothing to calm the storm inside her chest before she straightened her spine and lifted her chin the way her mother had taught her before she died. "Then, let us go see what manner of creature the council has chained me to," she said with ice in her voice. The throne room of the Kethson dynasty was a masterpiece of Etherian architecture, with walls of living crystal that sang soft melodies and floors that glowed with the light of captured stars. And it was here that Valara first laid eyes on Marcus Cole. He was smaller than she expected, standing at least a head shorter than the average Etherian male, with brown skin and dark hair cut short in a practical style that spoke of function over beauty. And he wore simple clothes of black and gray that seemed almost offensive in the grandeur of the throne room. His eyes were what caught her attention first, warm brown eyes that held no fear and no aggression, only a patient kindness that she found deeply unsettling for reasons she could not name. Her father, Emperor Kethson the Wise, sat upon the crystal throne with her brother Prince Chiron at his right hand, and both wore expressions of barely hidden contempt as the human walked forward and bowed with surprising grace. "Emperor Kethson, Prince Chiron, Princess Valara," Marcus said in perfect Etherian, his accent only slightly off in ways that somehow made the words sound softer. "I am honored beyond measure to stand in your presence and grateful for this opportunity to build a bridge between our peoples." Prince Chiron laughed, a sharp and cruel sound that echoed off the crystal walls. "A bridge," he repeated with mockery dripping from every syllable. "Tell me, human, what exactly do you bring to this bridge? Your people have no psionics, no natural weapons, no armor on your fragile little bodies. You cannot even survive in hard vacuum for more than a few seconds without dying in the most pathetic ways imaginable." The court laughed with him, dozens of Etherian nobles adding their voices to the humiliation. But Marcus Cole did not flinch and did not look away from the prince's glowing eyes. "You are correct, Your Highness," Marcus replied with that same patient smile that Valara was already beginning to find irritating. "Humans are indeed fragile by galactic standards, and we have none of the natural gifts that make other species formidable. But we have survived nonetheless, and perhaps that itself is worth something." "Worth something?" Chiron snorted and waved a dismissive hand. "The only thing you are worth is the political convenience your presence provides. Do not forget that you are here because the council demanded it, not because anyone in this room wanted you." "I understand," Marcus said simply, "and I will do my best to be worthy of the honor regardless of how it came about." Valara watched this exchange with growing confusion because she had expected anger or wounded pride or some display of the aggression that her tutors had warned her was common among humans. But this man showed none of that, and she did not know what to make of his calm acceptance. The wedding ceremony was brief and cold, conducted by priests who refused to look at the human groom and witnessed by nobles who whispered insults they did not bother to hide. And through it all, Marcus Cole stood straight and spoke his vows, with clear sincerity that Velara did not return when she spoke her own that night. She refused to share her chambers with him, and he did not argue or complain, simply nodding and asking a servant to show him to guest quarters where he would stay until she decided. Otherwise, you do not fight for what is yours by law, she asked as he turned to leave. Genuinely curious despite herself, Marcus paused and looked back at her with those warm brown eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted him to see. Marriage should be built on trust and affection, not legal rights and demands, he said quietly. I will wait until you are ready, Princess, whether that takes months or years or never comes at all, because forcing someone to accept you is no victory worth having. She had no response to that, and so she said nothing as he walked away with quiet footsteps that made no sound on the crystal floor. In the days and weeks that followed, Marcus Cole became a ghost in the palace, present but barely noticed. Always somewhere helping with small tasks that no one had asked him to do. He planted a garden in the abandoned courtyard near the eastern tower, growing strange earth, plants with colorful flowers that attracted curious insects from across the palace grounds. He learned the names of every servant and guard, asking about their families and remembering details that their own noble masters never bothered to notice. He spent hours in the medical wing, studying Etherian anatomy so he could assist the healers when wounded soldiers arrived from the border conflicts that never seemed to end. And always, he treated Velara with respect and kindness that she did not return, never once complaining about her coldness or the insults that the court continued to heap upon him daily. Your pet human is in the kitchen again, Chiron told her one morning with disgust, twisting his handsome features, teaching the cooks how to make something called bread, as if we needed lessons from a species that only discovered fire a few thousand years ago. Velara said nothing, but later that evening she found herself walking past the kitchen and pausing when she heard laughter inside, real laughter from servants who rarely smiled in the presence of nobility. She watched through a crack in the door as Marcus pulled golden loaves from the oven and handed pieces to the gathered staff, his face covered in flour and his smile genuine in a way that made something strange twist in her chest. Do not fight back, she said that night when she found him alone in his garden under the light of 3 moons. They mock you every day and call you weak and worthless, and yet you never raise your voice or demand the respect that your position as my husband should provide. Have your people no pride at all? Marcus looked up from the flowers he was tending and considered her question with the same thoughtful patience he seemed to bring to everything. There are many kinds of strength, Princess, he said finally. Not all of them roar. She did not understand what he meant, and she walked away more confused than before, unaware that understanding would come soon enough in ways that would change everything she thought she knew about humans and about the quiet man she had been forced to marry. 3 months passed since the wedding that had bound Velara to a human she did not love, and in that time she found herself watching Marcus Cole more often than she cared to admit. It started as simple curiosity, a desire to understand why this strange creature behaved so differently from everything she had been taught about his violent and aggressive species. But curiosity had slowly transformed into something else, something that felt almost like fascination as she witnessed the quiet revolution happening within her own palace walls. The servants adored him. She first noticed it when her morning meal arrived with a small bundle of herbs that the kitchen staff said were from the human garden and meant to help with the headache she had mentioned to no one but her. Handmade in 3 weeks prior, Marcus had somehow learned of her discomfort and had grown the remedy himself. Asking nothing in return and expecting no recognition, the guards respected him. She discovered this when she overheard 2 soldiers talking about how the human ambassador had visited their injured comrade in the medical wing every single day for 2 weeks, bringing food and conversation and genuine concern that officers of much higher rank had never bothered to show. He sat with Torak until he fell asleep. One guard said with wonder in his voice. Just sat there holding his hand and talking about Earth and the strange blue oceans and the creatures that swim in them. Made Torak smile for the first time since he lost his arm in the border raid. Even the nobles had begun to soften, though they tried to hide it behind their masks of superiority. Lord Vishan, who had once called Marcus the Emperor's embarrassment, now sought the humans' advice on agricultural techniques that had doubled the yield of his estate's farming. Sector's Lady Kirith, who had laughed loudest at the wedding ceremony, now invited Marcus to her gatherings where he entertained guests with stories of Earth's history that somehow made humanity's violent past sound like an epic tale of survival against impossible odds. How does he do it? Velara asked Cyril one evening as they watched Marcus help an elderly servant carry heavy crates across the courtyard below. He has no power here, no status beyond what my name provides. And yet people follow him like he is someone worth following. Perhaps. Your Highness, Sarah said carefully. That is exactly why they follow him, because he does not demand it. Velara had no answer for that wisdom, and she turned away from the window with thoughts churning in her mind like storms on a gas giant. The change came without warning on a night that should have been ordinary a trade. Delegation from the Varaxian Dominion arrived at the palace requesting an audience with the Emperor, and Velara felt ice form in her stomach when she saw the massive ships descending through the atmosphere like predators. Circling wounded prey, the Varaxians were feared across the galaxy, a warrior species that had built their empire on conquest and subjugation, with bodies designed for violence and minds that knew only the language of power and domination. Their ambassador was a nightmare-given flesh, standing nearly 3 meters tall, with armored scales of deep crimson and 4 arms that ended in claws, capable of tearing through starship hulls. And his name was Thrall, entered the throne room like he already owned it, his yellow eyes scanning the gathered nobles with open contempt before settling on Emperor Kethson with something that might have been amusement. Emperor, Thrall rumbled in a voice like grinding stone. The Varaxian Dominion thanks you for this audience and looks forward to productive discussions about the future relationship between our peoples. The Emperor nodded with careful dignity and gestured for the ambassador to speak his piece. But Velara noticed how her father's hands gripped the arms of his throne with tension that betrayed his fur. Thrall wasted no time on diplomatic pleasantries. My masters have decided that the 3 moons of Etheria Prime contain resources essential to our war efforts. He announced as casually as one might discuss the weather. You will grant us exclusive mining rights to these moons within the standard cycle, or we will take them by force and reduce your pretty crystal cities to rubble in the process. Gasps echoed through the throne room, and Prince Chiron stepped forward with outrage burning in his eyes. You dare threaten the Etherian Empire in our own throne room? He demanded. We have allies across the galaxy who would never allow such aggression to stand. Thrall laughed, a horrible sound that made several nobles cover their ears in pain. Your allies are far away and our fleets are close, he said with cruel satisfaction. But perhaps we can avoid unpleasantness. There is one more thing my masters desire. Something that would make us willing to negotiate more favorable terms. His yellow eyes found Velara, and she felt her blood turn to ice as understanding dawned. the princess. Thrall continued with a smile that showed rows of razor-sharp teeth. She will come with me as a diplomatic concubine to serve my master's pleasure. And in exchange, we will allow your people to keep one of the 3 moons, a generous offer, considering we could simply take everything and leave nothing but corpses behind. Silence fell over the throne room like a shroud, and Velara saw her father's face turn pale as he struggled to find words that would not doom his empire or his daughter. Prince Kirin hesitated, and in that hesitation Velara saw the truth. Her brother was actually considering it, weighing her life against political convenience and finding her wanting. Then a voice broke the silence, calm and clear and utterly without fear. "The princess is my wife," Marcus Cole said as he stepped forward from where he had been standing unnoticed at the edge of the room. "She goes nowhere." Thrall turned slowly, as if he could not quite believe what he was hearing, and looked down at the small human who had dared to address him. "And what will you do, little human?" the Varaxian asked with amusement dripping from every word. "Bleed on me?" "If necessary," Marcus replied without raising his voice. "But I would prefer you simply leave." The throne room held its breath. Thrall moved faster than anything his size should have been able to move. One massive arm sweeping down in a backhand blow that caught Marcus across the chest and sent him flying through the air like a broken toy. He crashed into a crystal pillar with a sickening crack and crumpled to the floor in a heap, blood streaming from his mouth and nose and a gash on his forehead that turned his brown face. Crimson Valor felt something tear inside her chest, something she had not known existed until that moment. But then Marcus moved slowly, painfully, with blood dripping onto the crystal floor. The human pushed himself to his hands and knees, then to his knees, then to his feet. He stood facing Thrall with blood running down his face and fire burning in those warm brown eyes that had always seemed so gentle. And his voice was steady when he spoke. "I said she goes nowhere." Thrall hit him again, harder this time, and Marcus crashed into the wall and slid down, leaving a streak of red on the white crystal. And again, he stood up 3 times. The Varaxian struck him down, and 3 times the human rose, each time slower and more broken than before, but rising nonetheless with stubborn defiance that seemed to shake the very foundations of the throne room. "What are you?" Thrall whispered with something new in his yellow eyes, something that might have been the first stirrings of doubt. "I am her husband," Marcus said through bloody lips, "and I will not let you take her." Thrall stared at the broken human who refused to stay down, and something shifted in the air. Some ancient equation being recalculated in the monster's primitive mind. "This is not over," the Varaxian growled as he turned and strode toward the door, his delegation following in confused silence. "We will return with our fleet, and then you will learn what it means to defy the Dominion." The doors slammed shut behind him and chaos erupted in the throne room, nobles shouting and guards rushing to defensive positions. But Velara saw none of it as she ran to where Marcus had finally collapsed to the floor. She knelt beside him and cradled his broken body in her arms, not caring about the blood that stained her royal robes or the tears that streamed down her face. "Why?" she whispered fiercely. "Why would you do that for me? I have been nothing but cruel to you since you arrived. Why would you die for someone who has given you only contempt?" Marcus looked up at her with those warm brown eyes that had somehow survived everything the monster had done to his body. "Because you are worth protecting," he said simply. "Because kindness is not a transaction. It does not require payment in advance." Then his eyes closed and his body went limp in her arms, and Velara screamed for the healers while something fundamental shifted in her heart. The human she had dismissed as weak had just proven himself stronger than anyone she had ever known, and she had no idea how to reconcile that truth with everything she had believed about his species and about herself. Marcus remained unconscious for 3 days while the royal healers worked desperately to repair the damage that Thrall had inflicted on his fragile human body. Velara barely left his side during those 3 days. Ignoring the whispers of the court and the confused looks from her brother, sitting in a chair beside his bed and watching his chest rise and fall with each shallow breath, she told herself it was guilt that kept her there. Guilt for all the cruelty she had shown him since his arrival. But somewhere deep inside, she knew that guilt was only part of the truth. On the 4th day, his eyes opened, and he immediately tried to sit up, before falling back with a groan of pain that made Velara's heart clench. "The Varaxians," he gasped. "Did they take you? Are you safe?" "I am safe," she said quickly, pressing him gently back against the pillows. "You stopped them, at least for now. But Marcus, they will return with their fleet, and we have no way to defend against an armada of that size." He nodded slowly, and something changed in his expression, a hardness entering those warm eyes that she had never seen before. "I need to get to my quarters," he said with sudden urgency. "There are things I need to do." "You can barely move," Velara protested. "The healer said you have 7 broken ribs and internal injuries that would have killed any Etherian twice over. You need to rest. Rest is a luxury we no longer have," Marcus replied. And the steel in his voice was something new and strange and slightly frightening. "Please, Princess, help me get to my quarters, or I will crawl there myself." Something in his tone told her that he meant every word. And so, against her better judgment, she helped him rise and supported his weight as they made the slow journey through the palace corridors. His quarters were modest compared to what his rank as her husband entitled him to, but they were filled with personal touches that she had never noticed before. Books from Earth, photographs of green hills and blue oceans, and in the corner, a small desk covered with equipment that hummed with unfamiliar energy. Marcus sat heavily in the chair before the desk, and his fingers began moving across the controls with practiced speed that seemed impossible for someone so badly injured. "What are you doing?" Velara asked as strange symbols filled the screen before him. "Contacting Earth," he said without looking up, "and calling in every favor I have ever earned." She watched in confusion as he spoke rapid words into the communication device in a human language she did not understand, his voice shifting from the gentle tone she knew to something sharper and more commanding. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, and when it ended, Marcus slumped back in his chair with exhaustion written across his face. "Reinforcements will arrive in 4 days," he said quietly. "It may not be enough, but it is all I could get on short notice." "You have the authority to summon military forces?" Velara asked with dawning suspicion. "Who are you really, Marcus Cole?" He was silent for a long moment, staring at something she could not see. And when he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with memories that clearly brought him pain. "Before I was an ambassador, I was a soldier," he said. "I served in Earth's Obsidian Division for 23 years, a special forces unit that handles situations too dangerous or too sensitive for regular military intervention." "A soldier," Velara repeated, and suddenly 1,000 small details began clicking into place. The way he moved with careful economy, the way his eyes constantly scanned every room for threats, the patience that she had mistaken for weakness. "Not just any soldier," Marcus continued, and he pulled up a file on his screen that made Velara's breath catch in her throat. "Commander of the Obsidian Division's First Strike Team, the unit they sent when there was no other option." The file contained records of battles that should have been impossible to win. A siege on Korath, Minor where Marcus and 40 soldiers held a defensive line against 10,000 enemy troops for 11 days until reinforcements arrived. A covert operation on the machine world of Nexus Prime, where he personally destroyed an artificial intelligence that had been planning to exterminate organic life across an entire sector. A hostage rescue on a Varaxian prison ship, where he and 6 operatives eliminated over 200 enemy combatants without losing a single civilian. You ended 3 wars. Velara whispered as she read the classified reports with growing shock. You saved millions of lives and defeated enemies that should have been unbeatable. But none of this makes sense. If you are this legendary warrior, why did you hide it? Why did you let them mock you and beat you and treat you like nothing? Marcus looked at her with those brown eyes that now held depths she had never imagined. Because I was not sent here to intimidate your people, he said quietly. I was sent to build a bridge between our civilizations. And bridges are not built on fear and threats. They are built on trust and understanding. He rose slowly from his chair and moved to stand before her, wincing with pain but holding her gaze with an intensity that made her hearts race. I wanted your people to see what humans truly are, he continued. Patient and kind and willing to extend friendship, even to those who treat us with contempt, not because we are weak, but because we choose to be gentle until gentleness is no longer an option. And when gentleness stops being an option, Velara asked in a voice barely above a whisper, then we become something else entirely, Marcus said. And the warmth in his eyes was replaced for just a moment by something ancient and primal and terrifying. Humans evolved as persistent predators on a death world. Princess, we hunted our prey not through speed or strength, but through endurance, chasing them for hours or days or weeks until they collapsed from exhaustion and we caught up at our steady, relentless pace. He moved to another screen and pulled up Intercepted. Varaxian communications that made Velara's blood run cold. Thrall's delegation was never here for trade, Marcus explained. They were an advanced scouting force. A Varaxian battle fleet of 300 warships is already on its way and will arrive in 6 days to begin the invasion of Etheri Prime. 300 ships, Velara breathed. We have perhaps 50 vessels capable of combat, and most of those are patrol craft. We cannot possibly win against such numbers. Your brother's hesitation has cost us valuable time. Marcus agreed. If he had allowed us to act immediately, we could have prepared better defenses. But even now there is hope. What hope? She demanded. Even with your reinforcements, we will be hopelessly outnumbered. Marcus smiled, and it was not the gentle, patient smile she had grown accustomed to. It was the smile of a predator who had spotted vulnerable prey. The Varaxians have never fought humans before, he said. They have studied our biology and concluded that we are weak because we lack natural weapons and armor. But they have not studied our history or our psychology or the things we do when pushed too far. He pulled up strategic displays showing fleet movements and tactical projections that meant nothing to Velara, but clearly told a story of war to his trained eyes. Earth's second fleet will arrive in 4 days, he continued. 60 ships against 300. Not ideal odds, but far from hopeless when you understand how humans fight. How do humans fight? Velara asked. Marcus looked at her with that predator's smile still playing on his lips. We do not stop, he said simply. We do not tire. We do not surrender. We do not forget. And when someone threatens what we love, we do not show mercy. He reached out and took her hand. And for the first time she did not pull away. They hurt me in that throne room, he said quietly. That I could forgive. I have been hurt before and will be hurt again. But they threatened you and that I will not forgive and cannot overlook. I treated you terribly, Velara said, with shame burning in her chest. Why would you care what happens to me? Because cruelty born of ignorance can be forgiven, Marcus replied. And because beneath the ice you showed me, I saw someone worth protecting, someone who cared for her people even when her pride would not let her show it. He squeezed her hand gently. The Varaxians think they are coming to conquer a weak and defenseless world, he said. They are wrong. They're walking into a trap set by an enemy they do not understand and cannot imagine. And what enemy is that? Velara asked. Marcus Cole smiled his predator's smile. Humanity, he answered. And humanity is very, very patient. Right up until the moment we decide not to be. The 4 days before Earth's fleet arrived were the longest of Velara's life. Filled with frantic preparations and whispered prayers to gods she was no longer sure were listening, Marcus had transformed from a quiet gardener into something unrecognizable, a commander who spoke with authority that made even Prince Chiron lower his eyes, issuing orders that reshaped the entire defensive strategy of Aetheri Prime with terrifying efficiency. He barely slept and barely ate, pushing his still healing body to limits that the healers warned would kill him. But whenever Velara expressed concern, he simply smiled that new predator's smile and continued working. The human is planning our defense? Lord Vishon demanded during an emergency council meeting. This is madness. He is an ambassador, not a military leader. Lord Vishon, Marcus replied without looking up from the tactical displays he was studying. I have personally killed more enemy combatants than the entire Aetherian military has. Engaged in the last century, I have fought in conditions that would reduce your finest warriors to weeping children, and I have won battles against odds that would make this Varaxian fleet look like a training exercise. The room fell silent. You may trust me or not, as you choose, Marcus continued. But I suggest you trust me, because I am the only thing standing between your civilization and extinction. No one argued after that, when Earth's second fleet emerged from hyperspace on the 4th day. Velara stood on the observation deck of the Royal Command Center and felt her heart sink with despair. 60 ships against 300. Human vessels were smaller than Aetherian warships. Compact and angular were her people, built with flowing crystal curves, and they looked almost fragile against the vast emptiness of space. That is your reinforcement? Chiron asked with contempt he could not quite hide. We are doomed. No, Velara said quietly, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. We are not. Marcus had already transported to the flagship of the human fleet, a vessel called the Unconquered that bristled with weapons Velara did not recognize, and his voice crackled through the communication system with calm authority. All Aetherian vessels will fall back to defensive positions around the planet, he ordered. Do not engage the enemy fleet under any circumstances. Your job is to protect civilian evacuation routes and nothing else. You expect us to simply watch while you fight our battle? An Aetherian admiral demanded with outrage. I expect you to follow orders and stay alive, Marcus replied. This is not your kind of war, Admiral. This is humanity's fight now. And humanity fights very differently than you have been taught. 2 days later, the Varaxian armada dropped out of hyperspace, like a swarm of metal locusts. 300 warships spreading across the void in a formation designed to intimidate and overwhelm. Thrall's voice boomed across all frequencies with smug satisfaction. Pathetic, he announced. 60 human ships and 50 Aetherian patrol craft against the might of the Varaxian Dominion. This will not even qualify as a battle. Merely a slaughter followed by a feast. Marcus Cole's response was transmitted on the same frequency. Calm and almost friendly. Ambassador Thrall, he said, I'm going to give you one chance to withdraw your forces and return home. Take this chance, because there will not be another. Laughter echoed from the Varaxian fleet. Hundreds of voices joined in mockery of the tiny human who dared to threaten them. And what will you do if we refuse, little human? Thrall asked with cruel amusement. I will teach you why the galaxy should fear humanity, Marcus answered. I will break your fleet and kill your soldiers and make you watch as everything you brought to threaten this world burns around you. And when it is over, I will let you go home so you can tell your masters what happens when they threaten my wife." The laughter stopped. "Attack," Thrall commanded, and 300 Varaxian warships surged forward. Like a tidal wave of destruction, what happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. The human ships did not form defensive lines or attempt to match the Varaxian formation. Instead, they scattered in seemingly random directions, engines blazing with acceleration that should have crushed their crews into paste. "They are running," a Varaxian captain shouted with glee. They were not running. The human vessels had split into dozens of small groups, each following a different vector. And suddenly, the massive Varaxian formation found itself trying to chase targets in every direction at once. Then the humans began to fight back. Their weapons were unlike anything the Varaxians had encountered. Railguns that fired projectiles at fractions of light speed, missiles that seemed to think for themselves and hunted their targets with malevolent intelligence, energy weapons that pulsed in frequencies specifically calibrated to penetrate Varaxian armor. The human ships were faster and more maneuverable than anything the Varaxians had prepared for, dancing through kill zones that should have destroyed them and striking from angles that should have been impossible. "They are using our own ships against us," a Varaxian commander screamed as a human vessel ducked behind a Dominion cruiser, causing the pursuing ships to fire on their own. All eyes, the battle raged for hours, and the Varaxians slowly realized that they were not fighting a conventional enemy. They were fighting predators who had spent millions of years perfecting the art of the hunt. Human pilots did not panic under fire. They calculated. Human gunners did not spray weapons wildly. They waited for the perfect shot and then took it with devastating precision. Human commanders did not follow predictable patterns. They adapted to every situation with creativity that seemed almost chaotic until the results revealed the terrifying intelligence behind every decision. The Varaxian fleet that had expected easy slaughter found itself bleeding ships with every passing hour, and the 60 human vessels that should have been destroyed in the first minutes of combat were still fighting with relentless ferocity that never wavered. Then came the boarding actions. Valara watched in horror and fascination as human marines in armored suits launched themselves through the void toward Varaxian warships, using controlled decompression from their own vessels to achieve velocities that made them nearly impossible to hit. They landed on enemy hulls and cut through with plasma torches, pouring into the ships and engaging the Varaxian crews in close quarters combat that should have been suicide. The Varaxians were bigger and stronger and had claws that could tear through metal, but the humans did not stop. They fought with weapons and fists and teeth if necessary, taking wounds that would have killed any sane creature and continuing to fight regardless. And the Varaxian soldiers who had never faced such an enemy began to break. "They will not die," a Varaxian warrior screamed across the communication channels. "We cut them and shoot them and they keep coming." "What are these things?" Marcus Cole led the assault on Thrall's command ship personally, fighting his way through corridors filled with enemies who had every advantage except the one that mattered. Thrall found him in the command center, surrounded by the bodies of the ambassador's personal guard, covered in blood, both red and alien, standing with a weapon in each hand and that predator's smile on his face. "You should have taken the first answer," Marcus said as he walked toward the towering Varaxian who had beaten him so easily in the throne room. "Humans do not roar, and we do not make threats we cannot keep. We simply wait until our enemies give us no choice, and then we finish what they started." Thrall lunged with all four arms extended, claws gleaming with killing intent. Marcus moved faster. Valara never learned exactly what happened in that command center, But when the doors opened again, Marcus Cole walked out alone, and the Varaxian fleet received new orders from their own flagship. All Varaxian vessels will power down weapons and prepare for surrender. Thrall's voice announced, thick with pain and something that sounded like fear. The Dominion withdraws all claims against Etheria Prime. This war is over. Of the 300 Varaxian warships that had come to conquer, 117 remained intact enough to retreat. The rest were debris fields and tombs, and of the 60 human ships that had faced them, 43 were still flying, battered and scarred, but victorious in a battle that should have been impossible to win when Marcus returned to Etheria Prime. Velara was waiting on the landing platform with tears streaming down her face. "You came back," she whispered as he walked toward her. Still wearing armor stained with combat and carrying the weight of everything he had done. "I promised I would protect you," he said simply. "I always keep my promises." She threw her arms around him and held on as if the universe itself would have to tear them apart. And this time, she did not care who was watching or what they would say. The human she had thought was weak had just saved her entire world, and she was only beginning to understand what that meant. The days following the battle were filled with a chaos of celebration and reconstruction. As the Etherian people tried to process what had happened and what it meant for their future, 300 Varaxian warships had come to conquer their world, and 60 human vessels had sent them fleeing in defeat. The mathematics alone should have been impossible. And yet the debris fields orbiting their planet stood as silent testimony to the terrifying truth: humanity was not what anyone had believed them to be. Palace halls that had once echoed with mockery and contempt now buzzed with whispered reverence, and barely concealed awe whenever Marcus Cole walked past. And the nobles who had called him weak and worthless now bowed lower to him than they did to the Emperor himself. Prince Chiron sought Marcus out on the second day after the battle, finding the human in the medical wing where he was once again helping tend to the wounded, this time soldiers of both species, who had fought side by side in the desperate defense of their world. "Commander Cole," Chiron said with stiff formality that could not quite hide his shame. "I wish to speak with you." Marcus looked up from the bandage he was wrapping around an Etherian soldier's arm and nodded for the prince to continue. "I owe you an apology," Chiron said, and the words seemed to cost him more than any battle ever had. "I mocked you and insulted you and treated you as less than nothing. And yet when our world faced annihilation, you were the one who saved us while I stood frozen with indecision." He dropped to one knee, a gesture of respect that Etherian royalty had not shown to anyone outside their own bloodline in 10,000 years. "I was wrong about you," Chiron continued. "I was wrong about your people, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the lesson you taught me." Marcus reached down and lifted the prince to his feet with gentle hands that seemed incapable of the violence they had unleashed just days before. "Your people judged us by our bodies," Marcus said quietly. "You saw creatures without claws or armor or psionics and assumed we were prey. It is an understandable mistake, and one that many species have made before you." He smiled that warm, patient smile that Velara had once found so irritating and now found so beautiful. The measure of a species is not found in their natural weapons, Marcus continued. It is found in what they choose to do with the gifts they have been given. Your people could learn to be as fierce as any human, and my people could learn to be as graceful as any Etherian. That is the bridge I came here to build. Chiron nodded slowly, understanding blooming in his eyes. "Then let us build it together," he said, and for the first time offered Marcus his hand in the traditional Etherian gesture of friendship and alliance. Marcus took it without hesitation. Formal ceremony of gratitude was held 1 week after the battle in the great throne room, where Marcus had first been mocked and where Thrall had beaten him to the floor. Now, That same room was filled with thousands of Aetherians, who had come to witness their emperor honor the human who had saved their civilization. And Marcus stood before the crystal throne in the simple black uniform of Earth's obsidian division rather than the diplomatic finery he had worn before emperor. Kethson rose from his throne and walked down the steps to stand before Marcus, another gesture of respect that had not been seen in millennia. Marcus Cole of Earth, the emperor announced in a voice that carried to every corner of the vast chamber. You came to us as an ambassador, and we treated you with contempt. You endured our insults with patience and answered our cruelty with kindness, and when darkness came for our world, you stood between us and destruction at the cost of your own blood. He removed the medallion from his own neck, the symbol of the Aetherian Empire that had been worn by his family for 100 generations. There is no honor we can give you that would be sufficient, the emperor continued. But I offer you this, the eternal gratitude of the Aetherian people, and a place in our history that will never be forgotten. He placed the medallion around Marcus's neck, and the crowd erupted in cheers that shook the crystal walls, but Marcus's eyes were not on the emperor, or the crowd, or the medallion that now hung against his chest. They were on Valara, who stood at the edge of the throne platform with tears of joy streaming down her luminous face. Later that night, when the celebrations had finally died down and the palace had grown quiet, Valara found Marcus in his garden under the light of the 3 moons he had helped save. He was on his knees in the soil, planting new seeds, just as he had been doing when she first confronted him about his strange behavior all those months ago. You could have revealed yourself from the start, she said as she approached. You could have demanded respect and proven your worth in the first hour. Why did you let us treat you so terribly for so long? Marcus looked up at her with those warm brown eyes that she had finally learned to read. Respect that is demanded is just fear wearing a mask. He replied, I did not want your people to fear me. I wanted them to see me, to understand me, and eventually to trust me. He stood and brushed the soil from his hands. I wanted to earn it, he continued. Not from your people as a whole, but from you specifically, because you were the one I was going to spend my life with. And a marriage built on fear could never become something real. Valara felt her heart racing as she stepped closer to him. And now? She asked in a voice barely above a whisper. Now I hope I have earned at least a chance, Marcus said. A chance to show you who I really am, not the weak ambassador they mocked or the legendary soldier they fear, but just Marcus, a man who has spent the last several months falling in love with the princess who treated him terribly and somehow became the most important person in his universe anyway. She closed the distance between them and took his hands in hers. Hands that were rough from gardening and scarred from combat and gentle beyond anything she had ever known. You could have any reward you wanted, she said. The emperor would give you worlds and fleets and treasures beyond imagination. Why would you want a princess who showed you nothing but cruelty? Because cruelty born of ignorance can be forgiven, Marcus replied, echoing the words he had spoken to her when he first revealed his true self. And because beneath that ice I saw someone worth loving, someone who cared deeply for her people, even when she could not show it. Someone who sat by my bed for 3 days when I was unconscious, even though she owed me nothing. He reached up and touched her face with infinite tenderness. I do not want worlds or fleets or treasures, he said. I want the chance to know you, really know you, and to build something real between us that has nothing to do with politics or duty. Valara leaned into his touch and felt something shift inside her, the last remnants of ice around her heart finally melting away. Then let us build it together, she said, echoing her brother's words with new meaning. Not as political partners forced together by treaty, but as true partners who choose each other freely. She knelt beside him in the soil of his garden, something no Etherian princess had ever done for anyone. "Teach me about these earth plants," she said with a smile that felt strange on her face because it was so genuine. "Teach me about your world and your people, and the things that made you who you are." Marcus smiled, the same patient, kind smile he had worn since the day he arrived. The smile she now understood had never been weakness. It was the smile of someone who had already won and was simply waiting for the universe to catch up. "I will teach you everything," he promised, "and you will teach me everything about your world in return, and together we will show the galaxy what humans and Etherians can accomplish when they stop seeing each other as aliens and start seeing each other as family." They worked in the garden together until the moon set and the first light of dawn painted the crystal spires gold and pink, and in the years that followed, as their alliance grew into legend and their love grew into something even the poets could not adequately describe, Villara often thought about the day she had first met Marcus Cole. She had seen a weak and fragile human, unworthy of her attention. She had been wrong. She had been so wonderfully, beautifully wrong, and she would spend the rest of her very long life being grateful for that mistake and for the patient, gentle, terrifying, magnificent human who had taught her that true strength never needs to roar.